Hey, good morning and good afternoon for some on the East Coast. I'm happy to see so many people joining us for the first Beyond Compliance for 2021. We're starting out the year with a bang and a big guest with a great topic. So we're going to be chatting about SQF Edition 9, and we're focusing on what's new since 8.1, plus we're covering tips for your conversion plans. There's a lot of detail, and we've got an hour, so we'll get booking here in just a second. My name is Aaron Bolsha. I'm the VP of Marketing for SafetyChain and the moderator for Beyond Compliance. For anyone that still not aware, maybe your first time with Beyond Compliance, this is an ongoing monthly industry update for process manufacturers, specifically tuned for the fine folks on the line, such as facility operators, QA, safety, compliance professionals. And we partner with thought leaders across different sectors. Think about labs and equipment manufacturers. Some consultants come in once in a while, definitely regulators when we can get them in, and many more. So our goal, very simple, just bringing insights around the market that shape the way we grow our businesses, deliver quality products to our customers, safeguard our brands, all while being compliant with all the numerous regulations we all share. So we do also try to give you some things you can take back to the plant with you today, help improve production, compliance, and quality. So SafetyChain sponsors this webinar series. And for those that aren't familiar, we are the #1 plant management platform that improves yield, maximizes productivity, and ensures compliance for food, beverage, and CPG companies. Trusted by over 1,500 facilities, SafetyChain is the only complete solution for production. Think about your OEE and SPC side of the house, food safety and quality, which is kind of what we're talking about today, that QMS side, and then also supplier compliance. So again, I said we're scheduled for about an hour today. We got a ton to cover and a great guest with us. So first, everyone is on mute. But we do want to hear from you. So use the webinar console on the right side of your screen there to submit questions through the presentation. LeAnn and I are going to save some time toward the end to get as many of those in as we can, because this is, I think we've already got one coming in, and we want to get to those as quickly as possible. But we also wanted to bring your attention at one point in this presentation where I'm going to ask you to chat some stuff in. That chat allows everyone to see the questions, and that's a request from LeAnn, because she's been very great to work with, and I'm very, very happy. But so when we get to that, that's the place where you're going to see, hey, put the chat questions in. So if you want us to answer a specific question at the end of the presentation, give us that question. And then when you're asked, we'll ask you to chat in. So, okay, LeAnn Chuboff, has been with SQFI for, I guess, 12 years now, and as a VP of Technical Affairs. But you've been with, in food service over 30 years, specializing in supply chain, safety, QA. This is like the heart of what we really talk about. Graduated from Iowa State University with a BS in food science, which is a great ag school as well. We connected on some football stuff when we were doing some preparation here. Also, in your current role, you're responsible for the technical elements of the SQF program, including the development, the maintenance, technical support. So you got a lot on your plate. LeAnn, welcome to Beyond Compliance.
Thanks. It's really good to be here. I appreciate you opening this up so we could talk about it, SQF Edition 9.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So since you joined SQFI, a few things probably have changed. I was curious, when you first started there, LeAnn, what edition was live?
So I started about 12 years ago, and we had just rolled out Edition 6. So Edition 6 was SQF 1000, SQF 2000, so only 2 codes, one for the primary sector, and the other one for the post farm sector. Mm-hmm. Oh, so just 2 codes.
It's been a few more now, huh?
Yes, a little bit.
Well, here we are, Edition 9, okay, coming in from 8.1. And when we first started putting this presentation together, you were adamant. You really wanted to focus our time and attention on what you have learned at SQF from the various discussions, trainings, webinars, and other presentations so far. So I'm really happy to have you with us. Before we get into the meat of this, just to level set, will you take us through and tell us about SQF a little bit?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks again for inviting me to present today. As Aaron introduced, I am LeAnn Chuboff, Vice President of Technical Affairs with SQF, and SQF is a farm-to-fork certification solution. Our SQF codes have been designed to represent all of the supply chain, from farm to fork, boat to throat, gate to plate, whatever little rhyme you like to use. But we have a solution for all food manufacturers, whether you're manufacturing food, growing food, storing food, or using food packaging. We even have a code for food service and food retail. So we are based in North America, just outside in Arlington, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. A global program benchmarked by GFSI. We were actually one of the founding members of GFSI and have been benchmarked since 2003. We have about 10,000 certificates worldwide. Our major regions are North America, Canada, US, Latin America, primarily Mexico, Asia Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, and China and Japan. So definitely have a broad reach and have, certificates in a smattering of other countries as well, but those are our key markets. So we're really excited to release Edition 9. We had a series of technical working groups that helped us put this all together. So yes, very excited.
Yeah, and we wanted to start out, we just wanted to sort of start everyone out with a quick question. Instead of just going in, we wanted to level set. So I'm going to launch a poll for everyone, and it's just going to ask if you've reviewed the key changes to SQF Edition 9 as it relates to your area. So I'm going to launch this poll, and really want everybody on the line. You'll see this pop up on your screen in just a second. Give us the answer that best describes where you're at right now. As far as
so feel free to be truthful. It's okay, because honestly, your code when you release it is really based off of when your audit would be, but it's just kind of getting a basic understanding where you are right now.
Yeah, this helps us to kind of go into the presentation, right? We don't know who's clicking what, so honesty counts, as LeAnn said. So I'm going to leave it up for just a couple more seconds. I'm guessing we're going to get kind of a mix here, right? There's going to be some folks, if you're like me, I tend to do things a little later, but with a lot of gusto. But I bet there's going to be a lot of folks that are especially in this sector, take a lot of time. They're in preparation. So I'm going to launch this. We got about 75% of the people that have voted. So I'm going to close it real quick, share the results, and I'm going to ask you, LeAnn, to just kind of comment on these when they come up. So, there we go.
Yeah, so this is pretty much what I was expecting, that we have a lot of people that are in progress that perhaps have read the code and done a different webinar, but haven't really done haven't done the gap assessment. And then you have some that, have been full sworn out and have identified, where their changes would be. And then some that just not yet. Maybe this is the first step. So you don't need to eat that elephant all in one bite. I think this is perfect. It's just one little bite at a time, and it starts with a webinar.
That's right. It sure does. All right, very good. Well, let's get this show on the road. We're going to go ahead and reshare here and go to present mode again. Why don't you take us through, LeAnn? I'm going to make sure you can still have access to my screen. Do you still? Nope. Let me do that. Yep. That's one of those. Yep. All right, you're good to go.
Okay, so let's get started. We have about an hour, and definitely save some time at the end for questions. But what I want to share with you today is basically the layout and design, those technical changes, the FAQs that we've had so far. I'm sure you all have a bunch, and as Erin said, feel free to put those in the question box. And then some implementation tips that we've want to share with you in some of our experiences as well. So here we go. What you're familiar with is edition 8.1 on the left-hand side, and then here we are with edition 9 on the right. So edition 8.1 outlines the different codes that we have currently and that are implemented right now. But the primary production code, as you can see, is now broken up into 3 different codes. So the primary production code was all under one code. It had one system elements with various modules behind it. But the edition 9 code now has 3 different codes, one for animal, one for plant, and another one for aquaculture. And that means that there's different system elements for that, for those industry sectors, specific that address those risks for that industry sector. And that's what's important to recognize. So now if you do livestock, you have your own code. If you do plant, it's your own code, and same thing with aquaculture. The other thing that I wanted to point out that is a difference is that primary plant production now include pack houses. So it's a more streamlined approach because you do have a lot of growers and packers, and now it's under one SQF code. So FSC 4 for pack houses is now under primary plant production. Previously, under 8.1, it was under manufacturing. So speaking of manufacturing, you can see here that we have now 5 different codes for manufacturing. So while under 8.1, we had all of our manufacturing codes under one system element, this opportunity we took with 9 is now broken up into 5 different codes. So we have animal product manufacturing, which includes slaughter and meat processing, as well as seafood processing. Food manufacturing, which includes everything from soup to nuts. And then dietary supplements is its own code with its own system elements, and same for pet food and animal feed. So each of those food sector categories were pulled out and have their own system elements. And it also allows us to create more guidance documents and tools specific to that industry scope. So it doesn't, the changes are really reflective of what we've done with food manufacturing, but at least now they're their own codes. Storage and distribution and food packaging continue to stand on their own with FSC 26 and 27. The quality code is still a separate code. And there weren't a lot of changes in the quality code. It still is includes process variation and HACCP for quality. But one big change is that the quality code is now applicable and can be used with any GFSI recognized standard. So it's not specific to SQF food safety, but is specific to any food safety program that's recognized under GFSI. So it opens up the door for this code, which we think has a lot of value to it to be applied to any of those GFSI recognized standards. As I mentioned, we are farm to fork, so we have a solution regardless of where you start and what industry scope you're in. So food retail and food service, those are under 8.1, and they haven't changed for edition 9. So there's no changes to that. It's just still remains 8.1. That is something we'll be looking for in the future as it relates to SQF, but those aren't benchmarked by GFSI. We don't plan on benchmarking them this year either. And then our fundamentals program, which is our level 1 in a sense, it's our introduction to food safety. There haven't been any changes in that one either. Okay, so, went a little too far. Sorry about that. Okay, so here are the code covers, and you might have known, you noticed a little bit of a difference, but we wanted to give the SQF code a new look and feel. So we went to our marketing team and our design team, and they gave us a new look and feel to the SQF code. So here are our code covers as it represents. As you can see, we have 11 codes under Edition 9 with the implementation date where audits will begin on May 24th of this year. And it doesn't seem like that's going to change. We also gave the insides of the codes a new look and feel. So we gave the insides of our code a more formatted look. So we were able to increase the white space, build up the font, and color code and track specific areas. So it's a nice readable font, and it really does make it a difference when you print things out. It does make a big difference when you're reading it. So just a new look. Part A has changed. So there are some changes in Part A in just the formatting of it all. So the numbering has changed, and it's probably not impactful to you as it relates to the site, maybe more impactful to the CB itself. The other thing I wanted to emphasize in Part A, if you've never had taken an opportunity to read Part A, this is really where all of the methodology is it's how your site is scored and what the frequency of audits would be, and if the site becomes suspended. But as you're reading it this year in this edition, we took this opportunity to write it from the site's perspective, because it's a reminder to say that we wrote the code for the site. So when a site is looking to implement a food safety program, if it follows the SQF code requirements, that's what it has to do. Wasn't written for the auditor. It wasn't written for the CB. The code was written for the site. So that's how we approached Part A. So some of the changes that would be impactful to you at the site is some of these that I've listed here. The first one is looking at the scoring. So we looked at scoring, and if you're a current user of the SQF code, you'll know that majors were scored at 10 points. So if you received one major, you automatically got a score of a 90. If you two majors, etc., at 80 and so forth. And minors were scored at 1 point. So we didn't change the minors at all, but we did change the scoring of a major from 10 points to 5 points. And we were looking at this as a means to see how could we the score better reflect the site. And you think, well, you think you'd make a majors more. But intuitively, it seems that auditors aren't scoring majors the way that they should. Major is a system element breakdown, and it's used to indicate that there are areas in one, there are breakdowns in one area, such as the HACCP program or sanitation or training. And when we look at our reports in our reviews, we've noticed many similar nonconformances that I think the auditor would have been better suited grouping it as a major nonconformance versus a minor nonconformance. So we're not saying that we think the score is going to go up or down. We're going to reflect and keep an eye on how the scoring is. But we want to make sure that the auditor isn't using points as a means to determine whether there's a minor or a major. Instead, we thought if we lowered the points to a major, there would be an opportunity to group more, and there wouldn't be a site that received 30 nonconformances, minor nonconformance, but maybe received, 3 major nonconformances. And that's a 15-point, difference, but it means more because then that site can really evaluate the root cause as it relates to a major as system element breakdown versus 30 minor nonconformances. So that was our thinking behind that. And again, it's something that we'll be monitoring as we roll out the code. The other change that we made is in the unannounced audit. So fortunately for SQF users, SQF was in the forefront of releasing and mandating unannounced audits. And now GFSI included it in their requirements document. So all SQF or all GFSI recognized standards need to have a mandatory unannounced audit. And so we're pretty much prepared, except the way that GFSI phrased it, it's one unannounced audit every 3 years. So that means that every 3 years, the site has to undergo an unannounced audit. The way that we had it phrased was one in every 3 certification cycles, and that means every 3 years is one certification cycle. You know, is those every 3 years would be 3 certification cycles. So it would be one in every of those 3 certification cycles, and then it reset after that 3rd certification cycle. The way that GFSI phrased it, it's one in every 3 years. So once you have your unannounced audits, it's reset after that unannounced audit. So there's a little bit of a difference in there. But bottom line, I think that our sites are very much prepared for that unannounced audit, and I think it's just one little hiccup in the system right now, so I don't see it being a problem for any of our sites. We did remove the requirement for desk audits for initial certification. So if it's a site that's undergoing an initial certification with SQF, a desk audit is not part of the initial certification. So there is no stage 1 and stage 2. It just goes right to the site audit, which includes the review of the documentation as well as the implementation of the SQF code requirements. So that was removed. It was never applicable for any of the other parts of it, of the certification, recert, or surveillance. We removed the audit duration table, and we referenced the audit guide provided by GFSI. So GFSI states a minimum of 2 days for manufacturing, 1 day for storage and distribution, 1 day for food packaging, half days for primary plant, and that's reflective within the Part A's itself under Part A, Section 8.1 of the SQF code. So we removed that table. The CVs can still use the audit duration guide that we have in the previous editions, and I believe that was even pulled from an ISO guide as well. So that all can be used as their methodology for determine audit duration. And again, that 2 days is the guide and can change based off of a number of different factors of the site. But we did remove that table and just provided the reference that GFSI has in their requirements document. We did include the option for remote audit activities. And as you know, SQF has the option where the certification body and the auditor can conduct part of the audit remotely. So they can do interviews, they can do document reviews, even some record checks remotely based off of feasibility assessment, determining the site's capabilities and the auditor's capabilities. But so we incorporated that aspect into Part A as well. And we also clarified the activities when a site is suspended, or if the site fails an audit, or if the site is withdrawn. So what we did is we added an if-then table, and an if-then table is a great reference. So sites out there, if you're looking at creating a good instructional tool, the if-then table is actually a pretty nice tool. It identifies a scenario and then the actions taken based on that scenario. So a lot of times if-thens are used for crisis management planning. So if I have a flood, then I do this. So just side note, it's really a good tool that you can use in your own development of your programs. But we applied it to what to do when sites are undergo a suspension, or when they fail an audit, or if the site is withdrawn. So we created this if-then table, and it really has a great explanation as to what the actions are if a site is undergoing suspension or withdrawal or fails an audit. Okay, so let's go to the technical changes in Part B. So this could, we could have a, hours webinar with the different changes, but what I wanted to do was kind of just summarize my top changes for Edition 9. And these aren't in any specific order. It's not a David Letterman list. I didn't save the best for last, and these aren't my favorite changes by no means. These are the ones that I receive the most, or we receive the most questions, we need further explanation, or whatever that might be. So that's why I pulled these out. So let's start with number one, which is food safety culture. So we added food safety culture within the code itself. And this was all part of GFSI. So GFSI put forth in their requirements document, the mandated food safety culture has to be now included into into codes, any GFSI benchmark standards. So SQF, well, I believe we always had food safety culture. I think our sites always had food safety culture. I believe auditors were always evaluating management commitment and food safety culture. We did put in a separate requirement. So we added it within the policy statement itself. So under 2.1.1.1, we did add under bullet 2 that policy statement should have a commitment to establish and maintain a food safety culture within the site. So it's added in the policy statement. Under 2.1.1.2 is its own requirement now. So now food safety culture in this context is auditable. So the auditor is will be looking to see how the site demonstrates food safety culture as it relates to their documentation and communication to staff, that resources are available, that food safety practices are applicable and, are ongoing, that employees are held accountable, that they are informed of their food safety requirements, that they're positively encouraged and held accountable for food safety, and that they're empowered to resolve those food safety issues within their scope of work. So we outlined our expectations of what the site would do, and I know there's tons of questions on food safety culture and what does that mean? How will the auditor audit it? And I think it's still up in the air as to how it would be audited. To me, again, like I said, many of our sites already had that culture as it relates to it. But the addition of food safety culture is one of the biggest additions that we had within the SQF code. The second one is in contract manufacturers, and contract manufacturers for this one, this was under 2.3.3. Specifically 2.3.3.2. And in this one, we clarified what the site's responsibility is for not just high-risk sites, but also low-risk sites. And now for low-risk sites, we allow for any GFSI audit or an audit. If a site determines low risk, then they can, that in order to demonstrate compliance, it could be a GFSI benchmark certification program and regulatory, and customer requirements. So under 2.3.3.2, we clarified the requirements for low risk as well as high risk, which we always had. We also added in there 2.3.3.3, which is regarding contractual agreements with third-party storage and distribution businesses. So if the site has a contract with a third-party storage and distribution business, then that would be included under the contract manufacturer requirements. So it would need to comply with 2.3.3.2, which is regarding high-risk, low-risk sites. So we did put a little bit more emphasis in there as it relates to contract manufacturers. And, just one of the things to mention here is definitions and glossary in Annex 2 of our SQF code. We have, or Appendix 2 of our SQF code, we have a glossary of terms, and contract manufacturer is listed in there. So review that term for contract manufacturers, because if you are using a contract manufacturer, you can understand why we want so much oversight of this manufacturer, because they're producing or doing some type of stage for that site itself. So review the definition of contract manufacturers and then that clause under 2.3.3. Number 3 is regarding a new requirement for product changeover and label reconciliation. So under product changeovers and reconciliation, that's under 2.6 2.6.1.2. And under 2.6.1.2, it's under product identification, and it's specific about when the site is undergoing product changeover, packaging changeover, and the procedures that surround that task. We also added in there that product changeover and label reconciliation records shall be maintained. And the intent behind this code requirement is that the right product is in the right package with the right label. What we see is the number one recall that we have with SQF, the number one recall that FDA is having, is mislabeling of allergens. So the wrong label or the wrong product is in the wrong box, or the wrong box doesn't have the right product. However you want to look at it, there are issues in ensuring that we have the right label as it relates to the product. So we do a lot of things right. So I don't want to think that the recalls overtake what we do wrong, but the recalls are so significant that we need to make a change in how we address product changeovers, because that seems to be where there are some issues that we're having. So that new requirement for product changeovers and labeled reconciliation, we believe will help minimize the incidences of recalls. Number 4 is regarding internal testing and sampling requirements, and that's under 2.4.4.2. And this is when internal testing is happening. So we already were familiar with the requirements for external testing and using external laboratories, and their need to be accredited to 17025 or similar, or equivalent. So what we have based off of the requirements of GFSI is that has now been integrated into internal testing. So it doesn't mean that internal labs, that if a site is using an internal laboratory, that it needs to be accredited to 17025, not at all. In fact, what we did is really take those requirements that are in 17025, and they're already pretty much addressed in the code. We're familiar with proficiency testing. We know our employees need to be trained if they're in this task. There's already addressed in the organizational chart and management commitment and food safety culture and all of that. So what we're saying is what a site needs to do is identify the tests that they conduct at the site. And a tip would be to just outline all the tests that are conducted at the site, whether it's food safety or quality or whatever it might be, and then pull out the ones that are food safety specific. Am I doing pH testing to, regulate the acidity level in my end product? Do I do any type of pathogenic testing? Am I doing any kind of water activity test, to ensure that food safety is being controlled at the end for pathogen growth? So identify those tests that are specific to food safety, and then you can move forward as to what are the methodologies that I'm doing as it relates to this particular test, what are the proficiency testing methods that I'm doing. So then you're just specifying those tests for food safety. So it's not all tests under the SQF Food Safety Code, it's just those tests for food safety that are being conducted internally. So that's what that requirement is for. And number 5 is the training requirements. So remember how I said that we had embedded many of the requirements as it relates to 17025 for internal testing in the SQF code, and this is one of them. So under 2.9.2.1, you can see that we expanded the list of what the site is responsible for training. And under sub-bullet 5, it talks about sampling and test methods for all staff involved in the sampling and testing of raw materials, packaging, work in progress, and finished products. So we already addressed that within the SQF code itself, and we expanded that list not just to include testing and sampling, but we looked at it for allergen management, environmental monitoring for relevant staff. So make sure you take a look at that list, because we did expand that list as well. Number 6. So number 6 is the additional requirement for adequate ventilation, and that's under 11.1.6.1. So previously in edition 8.1, ventilation was addressed just for if you had cooking vessels. So if you had kettles with steam hoods, then that's where ventilation and positive air pressure systems were referenced. And so for many sites that was non-applicable, but that didn't mean you had positive airflow or that you didn't have adequate ventilation controlling condensation, etc. So we added that as a separate requirement now under 11.1.6.1. And number 7, so number 7 is the added requirement for ambient air testing for high-risk processes. So for this one, this is under 11.7.1.2, and 11.7.1.2 is just for areas that have high-risk processes. So this is where your voice was heard as it relates to the public comments. This was probably one of the number one commented on when we published our code for public comment. And what it said was, you know, this shouldn't be applicable for all sites. This is mainly just for high risk processes or no processes at all. So what we did is we pulled it under high risk processes now. So if your site has high risk process in it, then 11.7.1.2, which would require annual ambient air testing as it relates to the product. And the site would have to do a risk assessment to identify what those potential threats would be, and then have the testing as appropriate. So number 8 is regarding the other codes, such as food packaging, or specific to storage and distribution and feed. My apologies. So under storage and distribution and feed, and this is specific to the food safety plan 2.4.3. So under storage, or for storage and distribution and feed, we actually had the opportunity to include preventive controls. So the site, GFSI, modified their language here so that it wasn't HACCP specific and that the site needed to have a hazard and risk management system in place. So that allowed for the use of CCPs or PCs within the food safety plan. It still follows the same setup as it did in edition 8.1 and identified the specific, it really walks through HACCP in a sense, but it is allowing for preventive controls or CCPs, critical control points, identified in the plan itself. And lastly is for the food safety code for primary plant production. And what we did is include additional requirements for water testing in the primary produce standards. So under 7.6.2.1 for irrigation water, we identified those risks to the use of CAFOs, which is those concentrated animal feeding operations, and the threat to the water itself for produce. So it's looking at irrigation water, treatment of irrigation water, testing of irrigation water, and where the sources of that irrigation water is. And we added specific language to there to address those recalls that we had in the past as it relates to romaine lettuce. So we added that requirement in there. And that is really a summary of those technical changes or the top technical changes that we had for edition 9. Like I said, there's a lot of different changes in there, but now this is where I want to see what you guys think. So in the chat box, as Aaron said, in the chat box, what are some of the biggest changes that you see that will impact food safety? So if you could put those in the chat box.
Yeah, I'll be interested in seeing what we get. Again, we'll redirect your attention to that webinar console on the right of your screen, everyone. So if you will, just type your message in there. It'll ask you to say, who do you want to address that to? We'd ask that you just address that to all, and that's that little drop down as well. And then you hit send. So I'm going to do one myself just to kind of say, well, I think the, kind of treading in your wake, LeAnn, I think
Yeah.
the sampling and test. So there we go. And I'm just going to hit send. Again, I'm just demonstrating how to do that. LeAnn, do you see anything there now when I put that in there?
Yeah, I see yours, but I really don't see anybody else chatting in anything, and maybe that's just something that they can't see. Like we said, we're just testing stuff.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to do it. This is something like this is your connection point to SQFI, right? LeAnn, trust me, LeAnn's taking this back to SQFI. They're learning from what the concerns are in the marketplace. So this is your time to really connect with LeAnn and SQFI. And you've got a couple other questions here too.
Yeah, and I've asked this question before, and many times it's going to be food safety culture. So a lot of times it's food safety culture where we think that will be the biggest impact to food safety. The biggest challenge for the site isn't going to be food safety culture, but I think the biggest challenge would be demonstrating food safety culture, and that's what I've heard in the past as well. And the other thing is that I see for the auditor is again, food safety culture and interpreting food safety culture as it relates to the site itself. So I think that will be it. But I do agree that in-house laboratory testing will be another challenge for the site, is understanding what their role will be. And I think, again, like I said, if as a site you kind of list what all your tests are and then pull out what those tests are for food safety, and then your methodology, your proficiency testing, your training, all of that, I think that would be a great place to start as it relates to preparing for for those changes.
Yeah.
I think for high-risk processes, ambient air testing might be a challenge to do in understanding what that risk assessment would be. So
I'm going to read. Actually, we've got LeAnn. We actually have a lot of people using the question area in the webinar console. So I'm going to read some to you. You can't see that just based on how this is all set up.
Okay, that'd be great.
So I've got something from Tammy that says food safety culture. She's definitely there. Joyce says less recalls due to mislabeled product, which is very good. We can all live with those.
I'll tell all our retailers that for sure. Yes.
Yeah. John says the biggest impact will be to the scoring changes. And I think that's huge, like that 10 to 5. That's really interesting. So Tanner says, I think sampling and testing method as well, since we do final product sampling, right? Yeah, I think that, and that the methods how you do that, again, are you, pens and papers are still being used out there, that's fine. Are you using electronic, and data, maybe you've got tablets on the floor, etc. Stacy says, I agree that ambient air testing will impact food safety in a positive way. Thank you, Stacy. I think label reconciliation and changeovers will make a big impact, says Maureen. Couple more for food safety culture, product ID changeover during production from Alfonso. Could help with reduction in recalls for incorrect label. Again, there's that same thing that Joyce was talking about. So I think this is really good. Overall, a lot of this I'm seeing a lot of positivity, LeAnn. I'm not seeing a lot of like, we're not sure. I see positivity here. Another one for food safety culture. So what we should do is we can actually, I would love to, I'm gonna ask my team to kind of put this data together so we can kind of put a table together to replay back to folks, because following this, LeAnn, we'll actually put a blog post together and a little ebook and kind of wrap this up as well. And I'd love to put this together in some sort of a format data wise, so people can see where the biggest impacts and biggest challenges are across the industries.
Yeah, that would be great. And then we can kind of share that with everybody, but that would be great.
Yeah,
Excellent.
one
Okay.
I would say on the food safety culture, and this is interesting, is understanding how to quote unquote justify it, right? How do you show culture?
Correct.
Is there something that maybe you could tackle there inside of that? It's not necessarily a question, but it is a challenge, right?
Yeah, and it is. I think from the auditor's perspective as well as the site's perspective is how do I demonstrate that food safety culture? And I think a lot of it is in the requirements itself, and it'll be up to the auditor to ask the right type of questions to the employees that would demonstrate it. So as a tip, I would make sure that when you're doing your internal audits, you're including your employees in those internal audits. So the people on the line and the people, that are doing sanitation as well as, pest control operators and all of that, because they're an integral part of your food safety plan. And the auditors will interview them. And so if they're not comfortable talking to anybody or not familiar with what they should be doing or saying, then it just makes it appear that, you may or may not have that food safety culture. But that's really what the food safety culture is about. It's about empowering your employees to make sure that they know what their role and responsibility is. And if things aren't right, that they have the ability to change them. And so, we've said this all along, but include your employees in your internal audit to make sure that they know what their role is. Ask them questions. Don't just assume that they're doing the right thing. Just ask them these kinds of questions. So we've said that all along.
Yeah.
That's our biggest.
And we do typically, we partner with some other folks too, LeAnn, to bring together a food safety culture webinar. This is really where we're starting to see more, mandates, a little more guidelines, some regulation around food safety culture. And there is a kind of a scale almost of your maturity level on food safety culture, where, if you're at the tippy top, you've got total buy-in at an executive level. They understand that there is an impact to all the things that we do in our plans, right? There's an impact to your customer satisfaction, your bottom line. They're able to draw that very clearly because there is a connection. And then they put resources behind that. That's something that you can justify, right? With memos, emails, things of that nature that you can produce for these audits. So I think we should probably, we're going to ask you back maybe later, way later in 2021, after the dust settles, after May 24th, to see if maybe we can pair up with you for a culture one, because that's important, right?
Right, and I completely agree, and I think that's what I think the resources and the competencies, and that's what the auditors would be looking for as well. Is the right competencies in place? Is the right resources there? So there's a lot of information we can definitely share once we get this rolled out.
Cool. All right, well, let me we'll get you back to going. I think we got about 15 more minutes. This is great.
Yep. Okay. Okay. So I want to talk about the FAQs that we've received so far. I'm sure you all have some, and that's where you can just continue to write that in the question box, and we'll get to some of those after this. So here's some of the FAQs we've received so far. So number one is really about the tools. When will the checklist and guidance documents be posted? So if you go to our website, SQFI.com, you'll notice that we do have some of those tools already available. So SQFI.com, under resources, if you go to checklist and guidance documents, you'll see that we have our change code documents, our numbering change, as well as an Excel spreadsheet for a checklist that you can start using right now. So their checklists are available. The guidance documents is what we're working on right now. So we are in the midst of formatting and populating some of the new guidance for some of the new requirements that are out there. So we're hoping to get those completed within the next 3 weeks or so, and have those posted. And we'll make sure we let everybody know when they get posted. But checklist and code change docs and the numbering change have been posted to the website. So go on SQFI.com and see that. The other question we get is really mainly from the CBs is how are they going to calculate the audit duration without the audit duration table. And so our response is that they can still use the audit duration table. We just didn't include it in the audit or in the code itself because it was interpreted that it would be auditable. And what we were seeing is that many CBs were taking that to the letter and not having any flexibility. So we wanted to provide some guidance and flexibility as it relates to the duration itself. So that's why we included what GFSI put forth in there, and then we also included some of the factors that would influence the duration of the site. So we expanded that section a little bit to create, we wanted to say, a little bit more flexibility in how the audit duration would be calculated. And now it's specific to the industry scope. So audit duration for manufacturing, for on the farm, as well as storage and distribution and food packaging. How will the previous unannounced audits fit into the change in the unannounced audit requirements? So our right now, it really isn't a change. It's now the change is 1 in every 3 years. So depending on when your SQF audit, unannounced audit was, if it hasn't been within the 3 years, you're up for an unannounced audit. And that's really what we're saying as it relates to unannounced audit. So there really isn't much of a change. It's just that the frequency has altered. So it's not, instead of 3 certification cycles, it's 1 in every 3 years. So your goal is to have an unannounced audit within every 3 years. So it would be based off your last time you had your unannounced audit. Will the implementation date be postponed due to COVID? Likely no. Never say never, but I would probably say no to that. I don't see why it would be. If anything, right now the unannounced audit requirement has been waived for 2020 until the release of Edition 9, May 24th. The unannounced audit has been waived. If anything is going to be waived, it would be the unannounced audit. We understand there is some anxiety having a surprise, coming in, and there are a lot of sites that have protocols in place as it relates to visitors. So that potentially could be waived, but the implementation part, probably not. How will the new numbering affect my policy and procedures? So policies and procedures, when the site writes them, and to be honest, that's how we develop our policies and procedures. We reference the specific GFSI requirement, and you all probably reference the specific SQF code. So you can change your policies and procedures as it relates to an update to the SQF Edition 9. But you don't have to. The bottom line is that you have to meet the requirements of the Edition 9 code. So if you are looking at changing policies and procedures at the end of the year and your audit is before then, you don't have to. That's not a requirement. So the auditor shouldn't mark you as a non-conformance or not knowing the code requirements simply because your policy and procedure doesn't reflect the newest numbering of the SQF code. So I leave that up to you, but it's not a requirement. And now the question, how will food safety culture be interpreted by the auditor? And I think that's a great question altogether, the interpretation of it all. I think all our sites believe they have that food safety culture embedded into their site. So we will be creating specific guidance documents as well as tip sheets or whatever it might be, fact sheets, for this one requirement for sure, food safety culture, and what the expectations are for the site and what the expectations are for the auditor itself. One way to start from a site's perspective is GFSI had a working group specific on food safety culture, and they created a really, really good white paper for this. So mygfsi.com has a good resource on that, and just you can search for the food safety culture white paper on that website, and it breaks it down. What are the specific elements? What should be included in there? So that's a really good place to start. And then what tests would fall under the new requirement for internal sampling and testing. And we kind of went through that. For food safety, for the food safety code, it's just those food safety tests. If you're using a ruler to measure the height of your bread, it wouldn't be included. But if you are using, but for the quality code, proficiency the 17025 isn't a requirement within there. So it would just be the quality test if you're using the quality code, but you don't have to follow 17025 because many of those quality tests don't have standard methodology for it. And then the last question that we get is, will SQF continue to be recognized by GFSI with the implementation of Edition 9? And the answer to that is yes. So GFSI continues to recognize Edition 9 because we applied for benchmarking within that time frame that they provided or required. So implementation, we published our codes back in October. Audits will start on May 24th of this year. No desk audit required. So if you're a new site, if your audit is on or after May 24th, it would be to Edition 9. If it's prior to May 24th, it will be to Edition 8.1. So for unannounced audits that, if you're scheduled to have an unannounced audit last year and your sweet spot is right around May, I always say, talk to your CB first, make sure that we are going to continue, that we will have unannounced audits, but if not, then I always say hope for the best and, prepare for the worst, and whatever your worst or your best is, but just be prepared for whatever it might be as it relates to Edition 8.1 or 9. And the last one is the surveillance audits will be conducted to the code they were certified against. So if you are under 8.1 and you received a score that puts you in a surveillance, your audit would be to 8.1 and not 9. Okay, so here's some of the implementation best practices that we have. So first step is really just start your gap analysis to identify your changes needed. So just go through the SQF, the checklist that we've provided, and just do your gap assessment as it relates to that, and use the corrective actions, identify what changes you need to put in place. So do that internal audit and really identify those gaps that you have there. And make sure you include all of your employees, even from the senior management as well, and then, or use an outside consultant to help you go and walk you through those stats. So this is the last poll, and really just kind of what best describes your readiness for implementing SQF Edition 9.
Yeah, so I'll get that going, and I appreciate this so much. This answered a lot of the questions, by the way, that FAQ, LeAnn, that I saw coming in from everyone. And while I launched this poll to see, and everyone, I encourage you, go ahead and take this poll. Again, we don't know who's saying what. Be honest.
Right.
So it should appear on your screen in just a second there. I tell you what, the questions are great. There's a few questions that we probably won't get to today during Beyond Compliance because of the specificity. People are asking about very like 11.7.1.2. And so what I'd recommend we do is we're going to funnel these questions. We do have them stored. The webinar itself has that capability. So we're going to funnel these questions back to SQF. So that we can follow with these people, because these are really valid questions, and I appreciate the approach that SQF and you all have done in really keeping this open. You said when we were preparing, we'll take the hard questions, it's okay. We want people to be ready, right?
Right, yeah, so yeah, send them my way and I'll certainly get them to you. And then some of those questions are really beneficial for everybody. So then what we do is we populate them and post them to our website as well. So we remove all the names and businesses so that your question's confidential, but for sure it helps other sites as well. So we'll answer them for you, and then also put that to our FAQ page and post them as well. So I see the results. A lot of you are getting there. Some of you haven't even started. Again, just start with your internal audit. Do a gap assessment. See even the changes, the top 9 that I identified. Are you ready for those top 9? It's just looking and, like I said, eating that elephant one little bite at a time. So definitely.
Yeah, it's a big elephant, right? Well, good. Let me, I'll hide those results. We'll get back to the presentation here very quickly. And yeah, we're just going to wrap up. There's a couple more things that you want to sort of go over. Let me go back into present mode again. This is one of those odd things that happens on the webinar. So from here, oops, sorry about that. There you go.
Yeah, no, went ahead of you. Just really quickly, I know we have to wrap up because we only have about a minute left, but just some three key takeaways. Don't wait, for those of you that haven't even started, take the time now just to even understand the changes. Write down how you think you would comply with food safety culture, and this is what you would need to do differently. So don't wait. Take the time now to understand those changes and seek advice. Focus on the intent of the code requirement. Many times we get down to the specific wording and verbiage in it, but really understand the intent behind the code requirement. It's easier to create policies and procedures when you understand the why behind it. I mean, if you already got that when we were talking about label reconciliation and product changeovers, you're like, yeah, it's going to help reduce recalls. So we're all in. And then use the tools and resources available, and don't be afraid to ask for help. Seek out advice. Go call. Many people just like to talk about food safety culture, regardless. You don't even have to pay them. So, seek out the advice, use the tools and resources that are available, and just get started with it all.
Yeah. Speaking of tools and resources.
And then also,
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
SQFI.com. Go check it out, people. They've got more webinars coming up. You're going to find those checklists and the change documents. Guidance documents are soon to be added. Call them, email them. LeAnn, you're very kind to list your email here. Again, this is a spirit of really coming together and making this happen and making it work so that it is better. 8.1 to 9, great changes. Brilliantly laid out, LeAnn, and we want to thank you again for coming. We are at the top of the hour, and ultimately, if you do have any other thoughts or there's some resources on, of course, SafetyChain.com. LeAnn, this has been great. You are fantastic, and we'll definitely keep in touch. Beyond Compliance is very thankful for your contribution today, and we'll keep in touch, especially after May 24th. I'm going to be probably calling you and saying, "How's it going?"
Yeah, for sure. And I'd be happy to, again, maybe join up and we could talk more specific on food safety culture, what we're seeing, and so that would be great. But again, chat in your questions or whatever, and we'll get to them. So
yeah, we will try and get back to everyone. Thank you for joining Beyond Compliance today. Again, LeAnn, thank you, and we'll wrap this up for the first one. Happy 2021, everyone, and we wish you all the best and success in food safety and beyond compliance. That's it for today. Thanks.